Welcome Life Science learners to another installment of Life Sciences. Trust that you guys are well and excited about our lesson today. Let's look at what we're looking at. In our lesson, we're going to focus on photosynthesis, and we're going to spend time revising this section. It's important that when we revise this section, we have a full understanding of the main core components in this topic. We will spend some time in our lesson going through some important terminology. We will look at the process of photosynthesis, which organelle it takes place in, some of the factors that affect the rate of photosynthesis, and then take some questions and apply our understanding to that. So, I challenge you guys to roll out your notebooks, to take down some of these terms and engage with me as we get into the lesson. Let's have an overview quick before we get into some important terms. As I mentioned, we need to focus on the terms that are again very important. We'll review the core concepts around photosynthesis and again talk about what are the important requirements of the process of photosynthesis. It's important that you develop a list of terms, and please note these. These are important for understanding. The first term is radiant energy. We know that energy from the sun is needed by plants for the process of photosynthesis. Plants use an important organelle called the chloroplast. Again, the chloroplast is that structure that is able to trap the radiant energy and use that to produce chemical energy. The concept and the process around photosynthesis happens with the pigments that are present in the chloroplast. And that is called chlorophyll, and that's a pigment that is important for photosynthesis. When we look at the structure of the chloroplast, we will look at structures called thylakoids, and these are important in being able to trap the radiant energy because they contain the pigment chlorophyll. We will also look at structures in the chloroplast called grana, and these are stacks of thylakoids. It's important that we recognize an area in the chloroplast which is called the stroma, and that is again the liquid part of the chloroplast in which a process of photosynthesis takes place. So guys, as an overview, it's important that we've often spoke about radiant energy from the sun being able to be used by plants in a process. That process also requires carbon dioxide, and so the leaves which contain chlorophyll are able to use these two products, carbon dioxide and the energy from the sun, and put together what we refer to as your carbohydrates or your sugar and oxygen, which is a waste product. Important to all of this is that the plant is able to use water and combine that with carbon dioxide to produce what we refer to as your glucose or your energy. Let's revise the requirements and the products of photosynthesis. It's important that we recognize what photosynthesis is. Guys, we often tend to use equations to write down any chemical reaction. Photosynthesis can also be learned as a definition from a simple equation. Let's try and do that in a bit. As I mentioned, photosynthesis is a process which synthesizes organic compounds. The concept of organic compounds would be things that are made through a biochemical reaction. Example, in this case, would be glucose. And that is made from your inorganic molecules, which are carbon dioxide and water, in the presence of sunlight. This process of photosynthesis requires a pigment, and that pigment is called chlorophyll, and can only occur in certain organisms. And we refer to those organisms as plants and certain bacteria as your autotrophs. So those are predominantly the individuals that have the ability to be able to use radiant energy. And for that, they must contain an organelle called the chloroplast. As I mentioned, it's important that we recognize that the equation of photosynthesis helps us in understanding what are the inputs or the requirements and what are the outputs or the products. So it's a simple equation that we can write down that illustrates what is needed. If you notice, my equation is given to you in a chemical equation as well as a word equation. As I mentioned, plants require carbon dioxide in the presence of water and they use energy from the sun as well as the chlorophyll pigments in the chloroplast to produce glucose and oxygen and water as waste products. This process can be chemically illustrated where 6 carbon dioxide molecules plus 12 water molecules produce a single glucose molecule, which is illustrated as a 6-carbon compound having 12 hydrogen molecules and 6 oxygen molecules. It's also important that we recognize that 6 molecules of oxygen and 6 molecules of water are produced. And so it's important that we're able to use this equation to be able to string together a definition. So using this equation, we can put a definition of photosynthesis together. So photosynthesis is a process which happens in the chloroplast in plant cells where carbon dioxide and water is combined together using energy from the sun to produce glucose, with oxygen and water being the waste products. And that's a simple definition of photosynthesis. Again, it's important that we learn an equation, and that equation again can help you to formulate a definition together. Right, so the requirements and products of the process of photosynthesis can be tabulated as follows. We need carbon dioxide, and that we get through diffusion into the leaves of plants. Water again is an inorganic substance that can be absorbed from the soil and transported via the xylem vessels to the leaves, and that we get from the roots of a plant. We also know that radiant energy, which we get from the sun, is absorbed by the leaves which contain chloroplast. We also see that in that chloroplast is a pigment called chlorophyll, and that is the pigment that is able to absorb the light and use that to convert the carbon dioxide and the water into glucose. What's important is that we need a series of enzymes, which really we don't need to discuss at the moment, but we need to know that all of this process is under the control of enzymes. Finally, the products are glucose, which is an organic molecule. Why do we refer to it as an organic molecule? Firstly, it contains carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And secondly, these are made through a biological process in a living organism, such as plants and bacteria. We also know that oxygen is an important waste product that a plant produces during photosynthesis, and that is vital to the survival of us and many other organisms that need that oxygen. So that's an overview that we've put together of this process. It's important that we recognize that there's a relationship between photosynthesis and cellular respiration. As I mentioned, there are many organisms that rely on oxygen that is produced by plants for photosynthesis, and that oxygen is used in a process called cellular respiration. If I were to quickly illustrate that process, I could use this image here. We know that plants are able to produce organic compounds, and that organic compound is called glucose. That glucose is used by the mitochondria in a process called cellular respiration, which in turn produces carbon dioxide and water. The oxygen from photosynthesis as well as the organic compounds fuel the process of respiration, and the products from respiration, which is carbon dioxide and water, are needed for the process of respiration. So collectively we can see that these two organelles, which are the chloroplast and the mitochondria, play a very important role in terms of the production of energy as well as the production of the requirements for energy to be produced in the cell, i.e. in the form of ATP, which is the energy carrier molecule. So guys, that's an overview of photosynthesis. Let's have a little break. When we get back, we'll try and look at the processes in detail. See you in a bit.